yes, we think what's in Rock is, if you're getting mailings from church, Rock gets those addresses, so I think the information is accurate. I'll just have to translate it into a format and an email where everybody can read it.
Thank you, Doug. Okay, I'm glad to be back. I had a great 50-year reunion at Mississippi State. It was really, I enjoyed the weekend and enjoyed seeing everyone. I mean, some of those ladies I hadn't seen for, 50 years. Anyway, and I'm leaving Tuesday to go to Denver to see my grandchildren, and I'll be back the next Tuesday, but then I am scheduled to go on a cruise to Bali, Indonesia, and Thailand, and Vietnam, and Cambodia, and Hong Kong, etc. And so I will be gone 22 days. So the entire month of February, I will be in the city of Houston 2 days. And David Upchurch is aware of that. I don't know what exactly his plan is. I have a couple of suggestions, but he has not told me what he really wants to do. But anyway, if for some reason I don't get to go on this trip because of the coronavirus, I'll be here.
You're not going to China, right?
We'll go to Hong Kong.
Yeah.
It's everywhere over there. I mean, when you look at the map, it's everywhere. But the boat will decide. I mean, the state ship people will decide. They don't want their ship infected. They don't want their crew infected. But they will refund everything that we paid if we don't go. So I might be here, I might not be here, but Barry has done a great job, and I really appreciate him being here. So we're in Genesis chapter 16. We're in 16. Now, before we get into this chapter, I'm going to just say one thing. There are many people who use chapter 16 as a club against women and voicing their opinion and etc. We're going to read the entire chapter here in just a second. But, in pastoral leadership meetings, one of the things that the wives of pastors often complain about is that, their husbands are great leaders in the church, but they are not leaders in the home. And so we need to keep that in mind, that yes, Sarah probably made a suggestion and got out of line here, but it was Abram's responsibility to take it to the Lord to see, is this something I'm supposed to be doing? So let's approach this chapter with an open mind and let the Lord teach us what He wants us to know about it, okay? So, let's see. Oh, yeah. I was going to tell you this. When I was thinking about that this week, probably about a month and a half ago or so, I was speaking to a young man in our church and about, a situation. And we discussed it for a pretty long time. And as he was about to walk away, he turned around and said, "Now, did the Lord tell you that?" And I said, "No, this is just a suggestion." And he said, "Oh, then I need to go pray about it." And that really should be our attitude. I mean, if the Lord told me that, he was going to take it as something that maybe he needed to act upon. But I said, I'm just suggesting that. It's not something that I have talked to the Lord about. So no, I'm not speaking on the Lord's behalf. So anyway, that's the attitude that we should have. We have ideas, but we need to ask the Lord, is this something that He wants us to carry out? So let's look at chapter 16. Last week, let's see. Let's just remember, Abram in chapter 12 went down to Egypt, and he wasn't supposed to go down there. He didn't ask the Lord about that either in chapter 12. Oh, look who is coming. Y'all have to open the door for him, please. So Abram went down to Egypt. Praise the Lord. So glad y'all are here, Shirley. Yes. He didn't pray about that. He just went down to Egypt because he was trying to find food for his family. And down there, that's when he lied about Sarah being his sister. And she's his half sister. Same father, different mothers. And but as a result of Sarah being taken into the Pharaoh's harem, he was given, camels and horses and male servants and female servants, and we think that's probably where Hagar came from, because she was an Egyptian servant. So then we see he comes back to the promised land where the Lord told him to be, and Lot gets taken off by the kings, and Abram went in search of, that was the only battle that Abram is recorded as having fought, but he defeated 5 kings, and then he comes back, and then because when he went down to Egypt, they had got so much stuff from Pharaoh. Here's another thing that happened in the family. The family had to divide, because now he's got too much stuff. It can't hold both he and Lot, and so they divide, and Lot pitched his tent towards Sodom, and Abram went north. And so then last week we saw that God made a blood covenant with Abram. And that's when he told him he's going to, and this is God made the covenant, not Abram was really asleep or passed out during that time. Anyway, God made a covenant with Abram and told him what he was going to do for him. So now we come to chapter 16. So we know that he's got some, Abram is really considered a very wealthy man, but he got most of his wealth from the king or the Pharaoh in Egypt. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarah said to Abram, "Behold now, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my servant, that it may be that I shall obtain children by her." And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So, after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. And Sarai said to Abram, "May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me." But Abram said to Sarai, "Behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please." Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she, that would be Hagar, fled from her, Sarah. The angel of the Lord found her, Hagar, by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, servant of Sarah, where have you come from and where are you going?" And she said, "I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "I will surely multiply your offsprings, so that they cannot be numbered for multitude." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Behold, you are pregnant, and you shall bear a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. He shall be a wild donkey of a man. His hand shall be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen." So she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are a God of seeing." For she said, "Surely here I have seen him who looks after me." Therefore the well was called Ber-Laharoi. It lies between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bore Abram a son. And Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. Now, okay, I wanted us to look at this from Hagar's perspective this morning, and so I came up with 4 M's. First, she's going to be married to Abram. Then she had misbehaved towards Sarah, and then she had a meeting with the angel, and then she experienced motherhood. Now, Hagar's name means flight. It could be that Hagar was given that name when she was given to Abram and Sarah as a servant, when the Pharaoh gave him, Abram, many men and women servants and slaves. It could be that she was given that name then because she was leaving her people, so she is fleeing away from them. And so let's think about the 4 M's that we have for Hagar. Before we get there, though, we got to figure out, what did Sarah do? Sarah went and said, "The Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my servant that I may obtain children by her." Now, we are not in the same culture that they were. At that time, children of a handmaid or a servant or a slave became the children of the owner. Okay? So if Hagar had a child with Abram, then that child, Sarah could claim that child as her own. Okay, so the Lord had told Abram many years before, he'd been in the land 10 years, and he had told him, your seed is going to be multiplied greatly. And so Sarah is thinking, okay, well, we've been here 10 years and nothing has happened. Now, Abram thought, well, maybe it's through Eliezer, his nephew, and he asked him that last week in chapter 15 before the Lord made that covenant with him, and the Lord said, no, this child is going to come from your loins, it's not Eliezer. So maybe she felt guilty, maybe Sarah felt guilty, or Sarai felt guilty, because the Lord told Abram he would have children, but he didn't say it was necessarily through Sarai. And so she begins to take things into her own hands here. Maybe she felt personally responsible because she was not having any children. So what else could she do? What the culture accepted at that time was give her servant, her maid, to Abram, and if the maid or the servant had children, then they could be considered her own. So that's what she did. Actually, there's a lot of documents that are not biblical documents where children of servants were given to their owners as if they were their own children. So, as a result of Sarah coming to, and we don't know, maybe she went and suggested this to Abram, and he thought about it. Maybe she just kept pressing him because she was trying to figure out, how are you going to have kids? You can't have kids with me. So she's trying to help him. God had said you're going to have, your descendants are going to be like the stars of heaven. And so she sends Hagar into Abram. Now, as a result of that, she became Abram's wife. Not just a servant of Sarai or a handmaid of Sarai. She becomes his wife. Now, second in position, of course, but she still becomes his wife, and it says on there that she gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. Sarah did not have the faith that she needed in order to completely depend on God. She thought she was going to help God produce the son that God had told Abram that he was going to have. So sometimes we can get pretty hard on Sarah about this, but did I give somebody Hebrews 10, was it Hebrews 10 to read?
10:11.
10:11, is it 10:11? Is that the one that, yeah, 10:11?
Day after day, every priest stands and performs his religious duties. Again and again, he offers the same sacrifices which can never take away sin.
Wrong verse. Wrong verse. Okay, I know it's chapter 10. Yeah. Oh, it's 11. It's 11. Look at Hebrews 11:11. Close. Yeah.
By faith, Abraham, even though he was past age and Sarah herself was barren, was enabled to become a father because he considered him faithful who had made the promise.
Okay, my Bible is the English Standard Version. What version are you reading from?
NIV.
Okay, my Bible is the English Standard Version, and it's a little different because here in the English Standard Version, Sarah is the one who has faith. It says, by faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. So there, in chapter 11 of Hebrews is considered the faith chapter. It has all the people that are listed and how they had faith in God. There are only 2 women who are listed in this entire chapter, and Sarah is one of them. So before we get too hard on Sarah about not having faith, she's specifically listed as one of 2 women in chapter 11 of Hebrews as people who had true faith in Jehovah God. So, but here, now she's going to try to help. I mean, and this was culturally accepted. This is something that people did, and so it was culturally accepted for her to give her maidservant to Abram to produce children, and they would be then become her children. So it could have been that she pushed Abram into this, and maybe she asked him more than one time, or told him more than one time. When we just read chapter 16 of Genesis, it looks like she just said, Abram, go do this, and he just went off and did it.
Why not?
But the thing that is most important in these first 6 or 7 verses is God is never consulted. Just like in chapter 12, when he goes down into the land of Egypt, God is never consulted. And so, and Abram knows he needs to be talking to the Lord about this. And so he really acts more like a pushover here. He's very meek and mild-mannered in responding. He does not take charge of his own home when he should have been getting in resolving the domestic dispute between these two women. Of course, he didn't. And so he just passively followed what his wife told him to do. She wanted an heir, she planned it all, and she told him what to do, and so he did it. So, when I was thinking about, I really tried to envision Hagar as a young person, out of her element, not knowing the language that they speak very well, and she is a servant to a mistress, and the mistress is giving her to her old man husband. Now you just think about that. Okay, think about Hagar in this. Okay. Now remember, Hagar didn't have a choice because she's a servant. She has to do what Sarah tells her to do. So Sarah is thinking that she has this responsibility, and I thought, how many times do we do this? You know, the Lord puts a project and puts a task, and we wait, and nothing happens for a while. And so when we set our heart and mind to something, we think we need to help it along. So we're going to help God. We're going to help this happen. You know, we're pretty sure that this is exactly what needs to happen. I mean, she knows that Abram needs to have a son. And so we get impatient waiting on God, and we try to then do our workarounds. We're going to do this. And usually when we do that, we start stepping on people's toes because somebody else has a responsibility, and now we have stepped in and done something that God has called someone else to do. Many years ago, I used to be, you know, when my kids were in elementary school, I was at the church every day almost. I mean, I was in every program you could be in. And the Lord one day just opened my eyes. You know, I do a lot of things a little bit, but not any one thing well. And when I step up and say, I'll do that, and He has called somebody else to do it, they're not going to come forward. And so just because a need is presented and somebody doesn't immediately come forward, yes, it might be something that we can do, but we need to ask the Lord, is this something you want me to do, or is there somebody else that's hearing this that you have called specifically to do that task? But we often assume responsibilities that's not really our responsibility to assume. So let's see. So Sarah decided, well, if he can't have children by me, then it would be natural for him to have children through my servant Hagar. So she's married to Abram, and then, of course, she gets what we would call big head. You know, she's it. She probably, who has Proverbs 30:21 to 23?
I do. Under 3 things the earth trembles, under 4 it cannot bear up. A slave when he becomes king, and a fool when he is filled with food, an unloved woman when she gets a husband, and a maidservant when she displaces her mistress.
A maidservant who displaces her mistress King Solomon said the earth trembles at such a thing. In fact, the earth cannot stand up to such a thing. So that's what's happening here. You can imagine what's going on in the home. She began to look at contempt on Sarah, and I can just now the word that's translated wife in verse 3, where Hagar became Abram's wife. It is also, the Hebrew word is often translated concubine. I mean, Solomon had many wives, but he also had many concubines. I mean, I don't remember now. It seems like did he have 800 wives? It's either 600 or 800. It's a ridiculous number. Anyway, I don't know. He had hundreds of wives and concubines, and that was his downfall. But she became his second wife behind Sarah. And so maybe what she did is she said, look, you couldn't have any kids, but look, I conceived. So you said God has prevented you from having children, but God has granted me favor. Can't you just see this little 18 to 20-year-old acting like this, And she probably taunted her, Sarah, and said, well, I can't bring you water, and I can't go get your food, and I can't clean your clothes, and I can't do these things because I'm pregnant, And so I can just see her. I can't brush your hair, can't do these things. And so then, can't you see her saying, oh, poor Sarah, she can't have any children. I wonder how many sons I'll have for Abraham. I can just see her taunting Sarah because Sarah's older and she has no children. And it was Sarah's idea, but I just thought God could have prevented Hagar from getting pregnant, just like he prevented Sarah from getting pregnant. Have you ever thought about that? Yes.
I think too, sin taunts you. That you have sinned, and so the sin itself makes you bitter and makes you look at that person and go, oh, here she is pregnant.
Yeah.
Here she is.
Yeah.
All of these things. So the sin itself can also.
Absolutely. So, and it was Sarah's idea to do this. So, but did you ever think about why did God grant Hagar a child but not Sarai? Have you ever considered that?
Punishment.
Punishment?
Yes. What we
You
have
mean
today.
punishment to Sarah and Abram?
What we have today.
Generational.
We'll see that later on in what's coming up. But I just have thought, God, why did you let her get pregnant? Why did she, of course, it sounds like in the scripture he just went into her one time in that, but it could have been an ongoing relationship. So anyway, as a result of that, think about that. Why would God grant favor to one and not the other? So now Sarah's mad. So she blames Abram. And she goes out, and you know that saying, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. So mama ain't happy in this household. And she blamed Abram for not having any kids. And now she blamed God for not having any kids, and now she's blaming Abram for Hagar's behavior. And so she throws out the Lord's name again, and look what she says. May the Lord judge between you and me. Ooh, when our emotions run high, sometimes things just pop out of our mouth. And so she's mad, she's fussing, and she just said, may the Lord judge between you and me, because it's like, I didn't do this, you did. Even though it was her idea, I didn't do this, you did. And, it's like, I didn't do any wrong, you're the one who did, and so it's kind of like it's your problem now. And I thought about her saying this, may the Lord judge between you and me. It was just the last chapter that the Lord cut a blood covenant with Abram.
That's right.
How many times is Sarah's name in there? And now she's going to say, well, let the Lord judge. The Lord just made a covenant with Abram. He didn't make a covenant with Sarai. And I thought, ooh, that's kind of dangerous to just throw that out. Let the Lord judge. What do you think? Really, she knows this, but and God's not mentioned Sarah's not mentioned in that covenant. So it's really not a smart thing to do. Yes, sir.
Abraham could have stopped everything by saying no, but he was part of the whole.
Absolutely. It was his deal. I mean, he didn't have to go in the tent, you know?
Yeah, but you know, she put the idea in his head.
Yeah.
And again, it's like any man, and I know I'm guilty of being that woman. But, I mean, there's a gene that we have. We can't help it. But he was, either way, he was in trouble.
He was.
If he didn't do it, he was going to be in trouble. If he did it, he was in trouble.
That is exactly why he should have taken it to the Lord and let the Lord say, no, that's not my plan, don't do that. So what was, when Sarah's fussing about this, or Sarai's fussing about this, Abram says, not my fault. Yes, sir.
It's almost a repeat of Adam and Eve.
Exactly. Exactly. In fact, where it says, and Abram listened to the voice of Sarai, that is actually a Hebrew idiom. It's a phrase that is when you are not just listening to, but you hear it and you act upon it. That is exactly what Adam did. So, ladies, we do have tremendous influence on
Oh, really?
our male Yes, we do. But gentlemen, what is your responsibility in this? Take it to the Lord. You're supposed to be the spiritual leader, remember? You know, we can make suggestions and we can throw things out there, but that doesn't mean that that's set in stone.
But you said it at the beginning.
Uh-huh.
Happy wife, happy life.
You are so right. Well, Sarai is not happy, and so Abram is now not happy, and so he should have been ruler. And what does he say? Hey, that's your servant. You handle it. Notice what he says to her. She is your handmaid. You deal with it. He did not refer to her as his wife, even though she was his wife. After him having gone into her, she was his wife, but he offered her no level of protection, which is what a husband is supposed to be doing for his wife. So, as a result, it says that Sarai dealt harshly with her, and what that means was she didn't get to not have her duties, her servant duties, just because she was pregnant. Not only did she have to get the water and cook the meals and sweep the dust out of my tent, she probably gave her extra duties so that Hagar was busy all the time. And Hagar could not stand it, and so she made sure she was busy. And so what did Hagar do? She ran away. Now I put this picture in here so that you could see this. It wasn't easy for her, because this is where she ran into. I mean, this was the kind of environment in which they lived. And she had rather run into a place like this than to deal with Sarai. So it had to have been pretty harsh treatment at the time. Now let me tell you about the culture at that time. You know, if you sent a servant in and there was any conception, then the child became the owner of the child of the owner. But the other thing is, that was part of that culture, is if there was a conception and if there was a child, the mother could not be sent away, nor could the parent be sold, nor could she be sold. So Sarah, the only thing that Sarai could do is be mean to her. She could not make her go away. She could not send her back to Egypt. That was not in the culture. She had accepted the cultural mores by having her husband go into her. She had to accept the cultural mores by saying, yeah, you're going to live with us forever. We cannot send you away, and she could not be sold. So keep that in mind. That's why Sarah treated her mean, because she couldn't do anything else with her. So now we have Hagar has run away. I put this picture of the map of how far she had run. Now that's the Dead Sea, and you see the Jordan River's going up, and just to the left of the Dead Sea, the blue spot in the map, that's where Abram's tent was, to the left of that. You see how far she has come? Down here to Beer Lahai Roy, that's where she had come to. So this was not just a few hours were gone from the tent, okay? She had run a long way. She's now in the wilderness. She's running around in the wilderness. She's headed south. It is assumed, because she's headed south, that she's going back to Egypt. And that's probably a pretty valid assumption. So, but notice what the angel of the Lord said to her. Oh, let me tell you this. The angel of the Lord, is this angel of the Lord the pre-incarnate Christ? Some theologians say yes. Other theologians say no. The reason that some theologians say yes is, you see the definite article that begins in verse 7 and verse 10 and verse 11. It says, the angel of the Lord, not an angel of the Lord. It is the angel of the Lord. So there's only one. So that definite article causes some theologians to say, this is specifically the pre-incarnate Christ. Yeah. It might be, it might not be. I mean, the people who oppose it say, have a whole nother argument, and so I'm not getting into that. I'm just telling you, it could be, it could not be. All I know is that it is the angel of the Lord, okay? But look what he says to her. What does he call her in verse 8? What does he call her?
Servant.
Hagar,
Servant.
servant of
Sarai.
Sarai. Does he say wife of Abram?
Nope.
No, he doesn't. He says, no, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? Now, he didn't ask that to gain information. He already knew this. It's just like when we studied earlier in Genesis, when the Lord came into the garden and Adam and Eve were hiding. And the Lord says, Adam, where are you and what have you done? I mean, the Lord knew where he was and what he had done. And we talked about then when the Lord asks questions like this, it's not because he doesn't know the answer. He knows the answer. It is to cause us, the recipient of the question, to start thinking about what the answer is. Where have you come from? Oh, I came from, I'm a servant and I'm running away. Oh, in that culture also, if a servant, maidservant, runs away, guess what the penalty is? Death. Death. If you run away, it's death. And so he is having her think about where she came from and where you are going. If she's going to Egypt, now there's lots of gods down there, different kinds of gods than Jehovah God. So he wants her to start thinking. He appeals to her conscience. Just like, have you ever, or she's in the desert, and she's getting refreshed at there is a water well there. It has been there for a while. There's actually a true well that has been built there now. But she's in the desert, headed toward Egypt, going in the wrong direction, away from where she's supposed to be. And I just think sometimes we can head off in a direction, not where we're supposed to be, and we get out in the desert, and the Lord look how far he let her go. And doesn't the Lord allow us to wander in the desert sometimes for a while before he speaks to us through the Holy Spirit within us and says, where are you going? Where have you come from? You know what your responsibility is. You know what your duty is. Where are you going? Or sometimes the Lord may send a Christian friend to say, is that a good idea to be doing where you're headed there now? So the angel asks Hagar, where have you come from and where are you headed? And she's truthful. She's truthful. She says, well, I'm running away from my mistress, Sarah. I can't deal with her. I'm running away. Now, my grandmother, every time when I was growing up, I was one of 5. my parents and my mother's mother often lived with us. She had a home around that area, but she often stayed with us because there's so many of us, and my mother taught school. And she would always say, anywhere I was going, anytime I left the house, she would say, be as good as your name. Be as good as your name. Just remember to be as good as your name. What she meant was, you are making a name for yourself in every time you leave here. And there's actually a scripture, I meant to look it up and I forgot to, that says, when someone falsely accuses you, live so that no one believes it. Now, I've been in the business world a long time, and I can tell you many times that occurs in the business world. People will falsely accuse you, and I can't tell you how many times my supervisors or people up above them have said, we knew you wouldn't do that. Be as good as your name. People will know your character by your behavior. And so that's basically what he was telling her to do, is go back and meet the responsibility that you know is yours. He didn't just say go back, but he said go back and submit. That meant she had to humble herself before Sarah. So, okay, go back and submit. There's no indication whatsoever that Abram had sent anybody after her. And look how far she had gone. And Abram, nothing says that he's sent some horses and camels and whatever else that he had possession of to go find her. So, God sometimes lets us wander in the wilderness too. We need to recognize. What does 1 Peter 2:18-20?
Servants, be subject to your masters with all respect, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the unjust. For this is a gracious thing, when mindful of God, one endures sorrows while suffering unjustly. For what credit is it if, when you sin and are beaten for it, you endure? But if when you do good and suffer for it, you endure, this is a gracious thing in the sight of God.
Yes, we are all servants of God, and sometimes we may suffer on his behalf. And but the Lord tells her to go humble yourself and do your duty. Not necessarily a pleasant environment or pleasant activity, but we've all been there. Sometimes we have to do. I tell you, I can't tell you how many young people I had who worked for me who would say, well, I don't like today. I don't want to do that. Can you assign that to so-and-so, and can you have them do this? And I'm like, this is why you get paid? You know, it's called work. We don't always like all of our work. And so, you know, we want to enjoy it overall, but there are always specific duties that I always had things that I did not enjoy doing. As a supervisor and a manager, you don't enjoy doing them, but that's why they pay you. If it was all fun, you wouldn't get paid. I can't tell you how many young people I've had to explain that to. You know, they just think, well, I want to only do the things that I like to do. Well, me too, but that doesn't happen. So now Hagar experiences motherhood. The angel told her she would have a son, so only the Lord would know what the sex of a child is. They didn't have ultrasounds then, you see. And so only the Lord knew that she was going to have a son, and the Lord named Ishmael. And there's one thing that I want you to recognize before we go any further. How old was Abraham?
86.
Well, he was 86 when Ishmael was born. That's the last sentence in chapter 16. And then chapter 17, how old is he?
99.
So how many years is there no word from the Lord?
13.
Ishmael was 13 years old, maybe some people say 14. You know, I mean, who knows, they didn't put months and etc. But I just thought, 13 years that Abram doesn't really have a direct word from the Lord, or not recorded for us. Look what he did, look what he's been doing. He did not take control of his family. And so the Lord says, okay, you don't think that I can produce an heir? We're just going to wait a little bit longer, you know, and see what you think about that. So anyway, Hagar had a son. Now let's look at the things that the angel said to Hagar. am I running out of time? Okay, I will multiply your offspring. Now that's the same promise that the Lord gave to Abram, but this offspring is not part of the covenant that God made with Abram, because he was not the heir of Sarah. He would bear a son, and that was what the Lord had told Abram, that he was going to have a son. God named him Ishmael. You know what the name is? Oh, I'm telling you. It's God hears. When Hagar named that area, what did she say it is? God what? Look at the scripture.
God sees.
God sees. And yet when God named Ishmael, he said, God hears. So, I got to thinking about that. Okay, you just told her the name is God hears. What did he hear? Nothing in here says that Hagar called on the name of the Lord. What did God hear? Think about that. I meditated on it for several days, I'll just tell you, because I want to know, why did you name him God hears when nothing in this story says anything about anybody calling on the Lord?
Maybe he was trying to respond to Sarai because she was without child and bemoaning it, number one. I mean, that's one of the options.
Yes.
The other one, you've got Abraham, he's still thinking the same thing.
Yeah, what did I do? I don't know. I don't know really. I mean, it's not recorded for us. But I think God heard her tears. Mm-hmm. He heard them when they fell. I mean, she was treated harshly. And God heard her tears, and he heard her broken heart, even though she didn't cry out to him. And that is why sometimes good things happen to very bad people, because God hears what's happening in their heart. And he hears their tears falling to the ground. That's just my thought. I just couldn't think of, why did you say God hears instead of God sees? Because she says, God sees me, And so, anyway, he shall be called a wild donkey of a man. Now, what do we call wild donkeys today? It's a slang word.
Yeah.
Okay?
That
So, that's what he is. Now, what that means is that he's rude, he doesn't fear anybody, he's untamed, he has no restraint. Does that sound like a group of people we know? The Arabs, of course, claim descent of Abraham through Ishmael and Hagar, and they are proponents of Islam, and they've always been and will always be enemies of the Jews. So, and are not. He will be against everyone. Is he not? Radical Islam? Are they not against everybody else in the world? And everyone will be against him. Is everyone not trying to eliminate Al-Qaeda? Really? Every nation is? He will be an enemy of his kinsmen. Who are his kinsmen?
Yep.
The Jews, the nation of Israel. Do they just not absolutely hate the Jews and the people from Israel? Of course they do. So we can go over there, America, and do as much as we can to be proponents of peace in the Middle East. But God says, this is going to happen. This is going to be the way that it is. So
never work.
Get used to it. We may have interim, short-term periods of peace, but we will never have sustainable peace, because God says he's a wild donkey, and his descendants are going to be rude with no restraint. They will do exactly what they want to do, and they're going to hate everybody, and everybody's going to hate them. So this is exactly what is happening and going on in the Middle East today because of this. So, okay, let's one other thing. She says he's the God who sees. You see, we like today, just like the young people that I've talked to, they want to be fulfilled, and they want to have pleasure in what they're doing. It's got to be, enjoy what I do.
Everybody's got to get along.
Oh, yes, and it's just going to be, we're going to all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. And that just doesn't happen in the real world. God says he sees, and he has given us a duty, a responsibility. And anyway, so it's he sees me, he sees us all, but she calls him El Roy, and that's why I put this in here. I want you to know that that's his name. That is one of the names of God. Jehovah God is El Roy, because he sees me. Then I thought about this. I mean, I really meditated on this a while. Why did the angel of the Lord stop Hagar from going to Egypt? I mean, if he just let her go on down there, you know, the Egyptians would be against the Jews today. But would we really have all this nation in Iran and Iraq that is against Israel? Why didn't he just let her go?
He had a plan.
He did have a plan, but it wasn't his plan.
He's
He's modifying. I mean, he's adjusting what Sarah and Abram have come up with. But why didn't he let her go on to Egypt? What did he tell her to do? Return and what? Submit, because she had a responsibility to fulfill. And God says we have a duty. We have a duty that we are to fulfill. He has given us a duty, and sometimes, yes, we have to humble ourselves. And sometimes it's not pleasant. And sometimes we have to yield to things that are not of our liking. But if we have a responsibility and we have a duty, God expects us to perform it. And these people who just give away, oh well, let's not get into that. Okay. The next thing is, I think that God also wanted us to see His mercy. I mean, is He not a merciful God to reach down to somebody who didn't even cry out to Him? I mean, and certainly He's merciful to us. While we were yet sinners, He was merciful to us. So this young woman has a broken heart, and He sees it and He hears it. And so He still does today. He's merciful to her, and He is merciful to us. And I think He wanted these people to see just how merciful He is, because people don't know Jehovah God. He hears us, and His mercy extends. And the other thing that I thought about is He uses it as an example. When Paul was, going on his missionary journeys after his second one, there were these group of people called the Judaizers who would come into the synagogues after him, and they would say, okay, because people who were Jews were turning to Jesus as the Messiah and accepting Him as that. And so they would come in and say, you can believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Christ. However, you've got to be a Jew first. So you've got to fulfill all the law, the commandments of the Jews. And then, yes, you can believe that Jesus is the Christ if you want to, but you must fulfill the law of the Jews first, because Jesus was a Jew. So those people were known as Judaizers. Paul had a very difficult time. Every church that he established, when he would go back, these people were either there or they followed him around. So he was trying to help them understand that you really are you are no longer under that law. You no longer have to adhere to that law, that you have a new law under Christ. And here's what he says. I'm just going to read it to you, and then I'll give you the reference again. Tell me, you who desire to be under the law, do you not listen to the law? For it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by a slave woman, that would be Hagar, and one by a free woman, that would be Sarai. But the son of the slave, that's Ishmael, was born according to the flesh. That means according to the work of the flesh. They relied upon the work of the flesh in their own strength. While the son of the free woman, that's Sarah and Isaac, was born through promise. Now, this may be interpreted allegorically. These women are two covenants. One is from Mount Sinai. What happened on Mount Sinai? When they were coming out of Egypt, what happened on Mount Sinai? That's when the law was given. One is from Mount Sinai, the law of God, bearing children for slavery. She is Hagar. Now Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. She corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. The people in Jerusalem were in slavery to the law that God had given. But the Jerusalem above is free, because it's the dwelling place of God, and she is our mother. And let's see, cast out the slave woman and her son, for the son of the slave woman shall not inherit the son of the free woman. So, brothers, we are not children of the slave, but of the free woman. This is something that this is in Galatians 4. The people who read this initially, they got this. They understood this far better than us, because we had never been under the law. But they were under the law and practiced the law and brought their sacrifices and gave whatever those priests told them to give. And only through the priest could they have forgiveness. Now, Paul is teaching them through this example that no, you're not under the law. You have a freedom because you were born under the woman who is free. That is the Jerusalem from above. So, he says, cast out the slave and cast not the children, and you are children of the free woman. That is Sarai. So, I think that's another reason why he didn't stop Hagar. God can see the centuries, so he knew exactly what was going to happen 3,000 years later. And that this is a perfect example so that Paul could use Hagar and Sarai, that these people would understand, the readers would understand much better than us, what it means to be in slavery and what it means to be free. And Paul is trying to teach them the difference. So, that's, okay, lessons in the story. Here we go. Take God at His word and don't try to resolve the problem on your own. So we get impatient, but we need to learn to wait on the Lord. Wait on the Lord. It's hard for us to do because we like fast food, don't we? We want it, we just like that. We not, we like to go to McDonald's because it's just right there. You see, immediately. We like immediacy. And unfortunately, God doesn't act that way. God sees and hears our problems even before we bring them to Him. He knows what's going on in our life. Even when we are so hurt and so despondent that we can't cry out to Him, He sees our broken hearts. He sees our tears, and He responds. And there will never be sustainable peace in the Middle East until Jesus returns. Because, He said, we got a wild donkey here who is unrestrained and untamed, and he will never be tamed. And he is going to be against everybody, and everybody is going to be against him. So, any thoughts or questions?
Thinking about this, why did